You're here to find your voice, and we're here today with Doug Schumacher. Doug, welcome to the show.
Patrick, pleasure to be here.
First question I wanted to ask you is something we were talking about before the show around your introduction to voice. Your background, you said that you were kind of coming into voice from a product perspective. What does that mean?
Product and marketing, really, it's a combination. My background is as a writer and product developer. and so looking at the voice space, I was wanting to figure out, I thought certainly something interesting here. I thought there was a lot of promise. This is, 2017. And I was trying to figure out how to get into the space. And of course, you've got several really great podcasts already. Terry, Bradley, Brett, all doing great jobs with their podcasts. And so I like the idea of audio, again, with my background in writing commercials and radio ads and things like that. I figured that would be, a good way to approach it, playing off the audio aspect of voice. And so I decided to do a podcast based around two voice bots this concept for two voice bots that they share the same household, and when their owners leave the house, the two bots start chatting amongst themselves and trying to figure out the humanity around them. So I figured that would be a good way to use some of my creative writing background, create an audio product, if you will, and introduce, get involved in the voice space.
Homie and Lexi is one of the greatest audio assets I think the voice community has produced. How did that idea just like naturally pop into your head, or was that a long process of design before you were like, this? Was it a strategic entry, or was it a flow for you?
It's both, because I sat down and I thought about what I wanted to do, which was something creative, something in the voice space. I wasn't sure if it would be a podcast or what. Exactly what that component would be. But so I am mulling around kind of what the framework of it should be. And then one day I'm just sitting in the kitchen looking at the refrigerator with my Amazon Alexa next to my Google Home, my Amazon Echo next to my Google Home. And I'm thinking, I wonder if when I ever leave, those two start talking. And that was the on-ramp.
How challenging is it? I remember seeing you up on stage and my team was behind me and they were like, what's Homie and Lexi? And I explained the concept of the podcast and they were like, whoa, that's the coolest thing ever. And we listened to it on the ride back. And then they were like, how hard would that be? I got to try that when I get home to try to get them to talk to each other. Is at this point, have they kind of seen your podcast and like, oh, we got to kind of stop that stuff from happening? I'm sure is it challenging to get them to talk to each other?
Well, it's all just, it's all, they're not technically speaking, they're not technically talking to one another. It's all scripted. So, in that regard, it's not, there's no technical feat there. The hardest part was trying to figure out which voices each should have so that there's a sense of separation in their dialogue without having to constantly invoke each other's names. So that was probably one of the bigger challenges.
And you also have created this shift in the industry. I've talked with other people and they say when they're on if they're on a live stream like this, or if they're doing something where they know it'll be played and the audio will be out, they will now shift to say Homie, or they'll shift to say Lexi, and you've created this alternative method of talking about the devices without setting them off, and creating this level of mindfulness in this age of ambient computing. And that was part of your design process, coming up with the names?
I didn't, the reason I gave them names was just gave them the nicknames, if you will, was a part of it just tongue in cheek. And also just so I didn't know if they'd be triggering the devices or what. So I was a little bit of just having to work around that, not wanting to have everybody's devices constantly going off. And
this question pops into my head around advertising. And I know that you have a lot of knowledge in this. There was that ad for Burger King. Do you remember it, where they set off the devices?
Yeah.
I know that my podcast, I'll sometimes be like, I'm hacking your device, and then I will say a launch phrase, and I'll just throw that out there. I mean, is that, what do you think of that as an advertising tactic?
Well, I think those things, it's always mixed, and it's always on a per item basis, because anytime you do a hack like that, some people are going to be pissed off. And of course, that's never been a reason not to do an ad. It's just because somebody's going to be pissed off, right? You just want to make sure it's the right people or not the wrong people who are pissed off. So in that regard, I thought it was very clever. You can do that once, right? You get away with those kind of gags once, and then anybody that continues to do it is just written off as annoying. So great idea. Fun, got him tons of press, but not exactly something not like a certain editing technique where you're going to see it on 20 more commercials within the next 6 months. This would be something I would say is more of a one-off.
Now, is Lexi and Homie still being created, or is it a completed package?
I'm still doing them. I've been less consistent about them recently. I think the last one I came out with was a couple months ago. So I've been looking at I've been exploring a couple different. The thing I would love to do would be to figure out how to do it natively without having to go down and do any kind of digital audio workstation mixing. I really enjoy working in a digital audio environment, but I also would love to do something with just the pure voices going straight into the voice device and having it work entirely within the voice app environment. Without
tell me more. I'm trying to understand.
So Homie and Lexi has a podcast. It's all mixed together, and it's all mixed together in I use Reaper. Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with Reaper, the digital audio workstation, but it's all composited in that with various sound effects. And I can, it's great because I can do certain mixing. Like, for example, Lexi and Homie are panned. Each one's panned 30%. One's panned 30% to the left, the other to the right. To, again, give that sense of conversation going on. Mm-hmm. So things like that are great additions that are possible because of the digital audio workstation, and because people listen to podcasts oftentimes through stereo devices or with headsets. And if I did something where it was just a voice app and the episode was in the voice app and it was purely using pure text to speech with SSML only and no other effects, sometimes like some of the effects, there was one episode I did where Lexi had to adopt a T-Pain kind of, the pitch bending technology. Okay. And so I tried to do that in SSML. No way, it wasn't going to happen. So I ended up having to do that in the digital audio workstation to go in and manipulate the pitch on a syllable by syllable basis, which was a bit of a pain, but just something that I couldn't have done without the digital audio workstation. So
we don't have a technology like an SSML or something that Amazon or Google offers that allows us to customize those voices, like Poly or.
Well, Poly's what I use to generate the voices, but even still, SSML is very limited in terms of it's really tough with any kind of emotional content. We were talking earlier about my voice marketing podcast, and one of the episodes I did was called how I took different examples of speech. Like I took a simple kind of playground children's joke. I took delivering the news over television or radio. I took Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. I took a Shakespearean sonnet, and I took a George Carlin routine, who's one of my favorite comedians. And I took each one of these text bits and I ran it through various text-to-speech voices in Poly to see where was that break point between here's synthetic. It was all synthetic speech. Obviously none of it designed for synthetic speech. Mm-hmm. And so the question was, at what point do you just lose it? And it was interesting because like the news clips, somebody delivering 2 or 3 sentences of news really was functional. I mean, it may not be as ideal and optimal, but it was, it was a functional way to get the message across. Whereas the George Carlin routine was just a wash. I mean, it just didn't have any of the cadence or the emphasis, and certainly none of the snarkiness and cynicism that he brings into a lot of his routines.
I've been working on this idea recently around voice. Have you watched the show Midnight Gospel on Netflix?
I have not.
Season 1, episode 3. They're talking about the magic and the power of voice. and they're talking about the ancient texts. So like one of the examples they brought up was the Bible, and they said, we're talking about oral traditions here. There's a reason in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word was God. It's not just the written word. It's not just the words themselves. It's how they're delivered. There's a reason why there was a master-apprentice relationship. These channels of energy, how things are being delivered, is more important than the words themselves. So like you took those quotes and you fed them in, but you say those jokes lose when they're not being delivered with the energy. The word is both parts, and it's sounding like you think the words we can do easy. Doing that other part of the actual energy delivery, like getting that energy across to another person using these devices is challenging right now, right?
Well, and the point you're making is interesting too, because it's not, it's kind of two levels, right? It's also which is the harder to create, in terms of the word and the message. Delivering a two sentence newscast, or even like 5 sentences about what the weather is going to be over the next week, is not what I would call something, as a writer, it's not something I would call that complex to write. I mean, I realize there are news writers and so on, and they have a craft, but I would say that is not as hard to write as a George Carlin routine. And so it kind of tracks both. I mean, in a way, it's the sound and the writing also track in their complexity in a lot of ways.
And I want to add one more on to shift into the next section of TV. In addition to just the words and the sound, but the visual aspect, you were saying that you think voice plus TV is an interesting intersection. You seemed to get excited when we started talking about it. Why is TV plus voice an interesting intersection for you?
Well, I think there's a couple areas. One, and you could look at it from two different ways. One would be the TV industry has a lot of interesting content. There's a lot of companies out there producing a lot of interesting, expensive content that they've invested a lot of money in. And so anybody who's doing that would be looking for any kind of avenue to promote in and make their product more aware. But the other one is I got I've had it for a couple of years, I don't know, a year and a half now, maybe. The Amazon Fire TV, and I have a lot of the devices. I have the microwave, and the TV I got not really thinking it was going to be that big of a shift. And actually, I have to say, the voice nav. I'm a cable cutter, so TV Guide hasn't been a real reliable source for me for a while for what's available or what I might want to see. And so this idea of speaking into a television, or speaking to the television to make a request for content, I find a really good user experience. I think much the same way people are finding so much value out of playing music via voice. It's when you have that much content, that many content options, the voice interface can eliminate a lot of tedious navigation. And so in that regard, if people are going to start navigating TV via voice, which I think there'll be a very clear benefit for that, just like there is with music. And one of the problems is going to be the TV turnover is so slow in terms of how soon people will all have voice-enabled televisions. Although I think Google's actually through the what is it called, Chromecast, I think is possibly solving that at the phone level. But at any rate, I think with people becoming more and more accustomed to speaking to their television to request content, it makes sense that companies would be delivering, or producers would be delivering, their content to a voice interface.
TV is an amazing use case for voice, especially when you're cutting the cable and you're already used to intentionally saying, this is what I want to consume. Just being able to use your voice. It's the same way that your friends are sharing those ideas with you. Voice marketing platform is, you mentioned that earlier. That's the podcast that you run now?
No, that's a product that a product template, I should call it, which is designed for helping radio and audio advertisers, and I would really emphasize digital audio advertisers, helping them reduce the friction between the ad format, the audio ad format, and a response channel or response mechanism. Like, if you look at my phone's going off here. I didn't think I triggered it, but anyway, let's see, where was I in that? So yeah, the idea is that, and Spotify's testing this. I mean, you can see this with Spotify testing it right now. You'll see ads that explicitly mention in fact, John mentioned this. John Gilliland mentioned this last week, that he had heard one of these on the Voice Breakfast, I think it's called. The Spotify ad that was asking to, I think, request Lexi or whichever app it was. I think it identified if you were listening to Lexi and said you could respond via that. So that idea is out there, and I think that behavior, the attempt that as an improvement in behavior is very valid. And I think it's going to be a couple things. It's going to be, as people become more and more accustomed to responding via voice, as they become as a higher percentage of people realize that's a much easier way to respond to an audio ad than simply, than trying to thumb in a URL or, God forbid, calling and actually talking to somebody.
So consumers, I'm thinking this is a benefit for both sides, because ads are annoying when they pop up in the middle of my screen. They're also annoying when I have to go, like getting direct mail. But in this case, all I have to say is no, or sometimes just not even respond, and my content will continue to play. I find it interesting that you're mentioning Spotify as a leader. So can you tell me more about what it is they're doing? Are they actually making ads interactive such that I'm playing music on Spotify from Beautiful Chorus, and in between, if I didn't have premium, they might have an ad where I can actually respond by voice? Or
Yes.
is it more providing that, yes?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's what John was describing, and I heard something, or no, I read something. I read about this a month ago, that they were testing this kind of platform out, and I think it makes sense. It's the voice landing page, if you will. I've heard it referred to as that. So
Spotify is the voice landing page?
No, just the idea of using voice as a way to respond to an audio ad. Or anything, really. I think audio is an interesting application for it, because people tend to listen to podcasts over a specific device like a mobile phone. It's easy to target digital audio via platform. So some of the rough edges, like, for example, if you did this on a billboard, somebody could go and they could see the billboard, and I have an Android phone, and I might know that, oh yes, all I have to do is squeeze my active edge and ask it, to repeat whatever the term was that was the invocation, and I could be in that same environment. But there's a lot of potential miss there too. There's a lot of people are going to see that billboard that have an iPhone, and Siri might not work that way, or maybe they use the Amazon Echo device, and so that's not as portable. There's a lot of potential issues with that. So to me, the beauty of audio, and in particular digital audio advertising, is just simply you can target very specifically by the Android platform, and that at least gives you a much higher rate of people in your largest addressable qualified audience, if you will. Who could possibly respond to that? Well, it has to be somebody with an Android phone.
When there's a digital ad, or I'm sorry, when there's a billboard ad or something that's physical and you're putting it in physical space, like on a bus stop, do you recommend sticking with a phrase like Google specifically or Alexa specifically? Like, a lot of what we produce and a lot of our things are on both Alexa and Google, and probably soon Bixby as well. Do you recommend that we specify one or the other, try to squeeze both and do twice as much text, or just go with like an ambiguous phrase, like just say this to your speaker?
Yeah, this is an interesting area. And I think that it's not to be a cop-out, but it depends, right? There's so many variables. I mean, who's your target audience? What are they most likely to have? Where is the billboard located? Is it somewhere that they might be in their car while they're seeing it, and you're looking at an audio voice experience, or what? There's just a lot of different variables. But the point you brought up, I think, is really interesting. Of we want to get to this lowest common denominator invocation phrase, right? So you don't have to, so that you don't have to say, you don't have to specify the platform. It works lowest common denominator. And I think that would probably be possible in some cases, but not obvious. So that would be something that'd probably be one of the first things I would suggest looking into for any solution would be, can this work across any voice space? And that would open it up to being something that could work on a broader scale. And then everybody would just read or apply it to whatever voice experience they have. But, the big cognitive load, if you will, is still going to be lighter, right? If I tell you to remember a really interesting phrase, like, or just a memorable phrase like Nike Plus, or Nike Plus discount, or anything like that, you could probably remember that for the next 2 weeks without too much trouble. If I asked you to remember a URL or a phone number, whole different ballgame. So that's where I think having this lowest common denominator invocation method or phrase and being able to apply that to any platform would certainly serve the marketing metrics.
So when we get to the end of an episode, I typically like to say the best thing or the biggest takeaway, but with what you've given, I'm going to say 3 that I wrote down. The first being what you just said. I'm going to start with the most recent, lowest common denominator invocation. Yes. Number 2, Spotify being a leader in terms of voice ads. Everybody listening, whether you're running a business or whether you're developing for a company, starting to think about, as a consumer or as a business owner, creating more interactive ads by voice, and the fact that there are very few industry leaders, I like that as well. And third, TV is an amazing interface. Voice is an amazing interface for TV. Voice is an amazing UX for TV. So
absolutely.
Thank you for being here. And second to last question, for people that want to contact you or people that want to follow along or get connected, what's the best way for them to find Doug Schumacher?
Thanks. Two easiest, DougSchumacher.com. And if Schumacher is tough to spell, Meme Runner on Twitter. I'm Meme Runner, MEME Runner, like Blade Runner, but running memes.
It's been amazing having you on today. I would like you to end this, if that's okay, with any sort of final words or intentions. What we'll do is I'll leave it over to you. You'll finish, and then I'll just stop the live stream. So thanks, everybody, and any final words or intentions for the audience?
I would just throw out to everybody in the voice space, there's so much, there's so many amazing people and so much interesting work being done right now that I thank the work that everybody's doing, and I think it's a great community, and I look forward to everybody moving the stick forward.